Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The following content is provided for educational and entertainment purposes only. The discussion regarding divorce trends, legal frameworks, and financial implications does not constitute legal, financial, tax, or professional matrimonial advice. Divorce laws vary significantly by state, and individual circumstances can lead to widely different potential outcomes. Furthermore, the emotional and psychological aspects discussed are based on historical trends and sociological observations, not clinical therapy. You should conduct your own due diligence and consult with qualified legal and financial professionals regarding your specific situation before making any major life decisions or entering into legal agreements. Imagine a couple that has been married for 35 years. They have raised 3 children, paid off a mortgage, and are standing on the precipice of a hard-earned retirement. To the outside world, they are the bedrock of their community. But inside the home, the silence is deafening. One morning, over a quiet breakfast, one spouse looks at the other and says, "I want a divorce." This isn't a scene from a fictional drama. It is a reality unfolding across the United States at a staggering frequency. While divorce rates among younger generations like millennials and Gen Z are actually on a downward trajectory, the rate for Americans over the age of 50 has more than doubled since 1990. For those over 65, the rate has tripled. We are currently living through what sociologists have dubbed the Great Divorce Revolution, a silver-haired tsunami that is fundamentally restructuring the American family, the housing market, and the very concept of the golden years. If you look at the historical data provided by the Pew Research Center and the U.S. Census Bureau, the contrast is jarring. In 1990, fewer than 10% of people who divorced were age 50 or older. Fast forward to the present day, and that figure has climbed to 1 in 4. This means that approximately 25% of all divorces in the United States now involve the baby boomer demographic. This trend is not just a statistical anomaly. It is a massive sociological shift that carries profound implications for wealth transfer, healthcare, and social isolation in old age. Why is the generation that pioneered the concept of the nuclear family now leading the charge in dismantling it during their senior years? To understand this, we have to look past the surface-level arguments and dive deep into the unique historical and psychological makeup of the baby boomer generation. The baby boomers have always been a generation of disruptors. Born between 1946 and 1964, they came of age during an era of unprecedented social change. They were the generation of the 1960s counterculture, the feminist movement, and the civil rights movement. Most importantly, they were the first generation to normalize divorce on a large scale in their youth. During the 1970s, as no-fault divorce laws began to sweep across the country starting in California, this demographic saw a massive spike in marital dissolutions. They were the ones who moved away from the idea that marriage was a permanent, unbreakable contract regardless of personal happiness, shifting the focus toward self-actualization and individual fulfillment. However, many of them eventually remarried, or those who stayed in their first marriages hit a period of relative stability during their middle years while they focused on career building and child-rearing. Now, as they reach the final third of their lives, that old spirit of self-actualization is resurfacing with a vengeance. One of the primary catalysts we see in historical trends is the increase in human longevity. In previous centuries, the concept of till death do us part often meant a marriage of 20 or 25 years because life expectancy was significantly lower. Today, a healthy 60-year-old in the United States can reasonably expect to live another 20 or 30 years. This leads to a profound psychological realization often referred to as the second adulthood. When the children move out, a phenomenon known as the empty nest, the primary adhesive holding the marriage together often dissolves. Suddenly, a couple is left staring at each other across an empty dining table, realizing they have 30 years of life left and very little in common besides the children they just launched into the world. In past generations, these couples might have stayed together out of duty or lack of options. But boomers are increasingly deciding that 30 years is too long to spend in a state of lukewarm companionship or active resentment. This deep dive is designed to serve as a masterclass for anyone navigating this transition, whether you are a boomer yourself, a child of divorcing parents, or a professional working within the legal or financial sectors. Over the course of this series, we are going to solve the mystery of why this trend is accelerating despite the massive financial risks involved. We are going to look at the unique challenges of dividing a lifetime of assets, including the complexities of Social Security benefits, pension plans, and the family home that has gained immense equity over 4 decades. We will examine case studies of potential outcomes where individuals successfully navigated a gray divorce to find a new lease on life, contrasted with historical trends where the financial hit led to a significant drop in the standard of living, particularly for women. The stakes could not be higher. A divorce at age 25 is a setback. A divorce at age 65 can be a catastrophe if not managed with surgical precision. When you divorce young, you have decades of earning potential ahead of you to recoup your losses. When you divorce at the doorstep of retirement, you are splitting a finite nest egg that likely has to last the rest of your life. There is no time for a do-over. This video series is your roadmap through the legal, financial, and social labyrinth of the gray divorce. We will discuss the Qualified Domestic Relations Order, or QDRO, which is the essential legal instrument used to split retirement accounts without triggering massive tax penalties. We will look at the impact on adult children, who are often overlooked in the narrative of divorce, but who experience a unique form of grief when their childhood foundation is dismantled in their 30s or 40s. We are also going to tackle the gender gap in gray divorce. Historical trends indicate that women are actually the initiators of gray divorce in about 66% of cases. This is a fascinating reversal of traditional narratives. We will explore why boomer women, many of whom gained financial independence and entered the workforce in record numbers, are now choosing autonomy over the security of a long-term marriage. We will look at the concept of the silver splitter, and how the social stigma of being a divorcee has almost entirely vanished in the modern era, replaced by a culture that prizes personal happiness and health above all else. By the end of this 10-part masterclass, you will have a comprehensive understanding of the mechanics behind the gray divorce revolution. You will understand the potential outcomes of various asset division strategies, the sociological reasons behind the rise in late-life breakups, and the step-by-step realities of restructuring a life after several decades of partnership. This is not about encouraging divorce, nor is it about condemning it. It is about looking at the data, the history, and the lived experiences of millions of Americans to understand a trend that is changing the face of the country. We are moving beyond the headlines to look at the granular details of how a generation is redefining the end of the American marriage. Stay with us as we peel back the layers of this complex, high-stakes phenomenon, starting with the economic engine that drives these decisions, and the hidden costs that many couples fail to see until it is too long after the papers are signed. This is the ultimate guide to understanding the most significant demographic shift in the modern American landscape. To truly grasp why gray divorce has reached a boiling point in 2026, we have to look at the economic engine driving these decisions. For decades, the primary deterrent to divorce was financial survival. In the mid-20th century, the traditional American household often relied on a single income, usually the husband's, leaving the wife with limited pathways to independent financial stability. However, the baby boomer generation fundamentally altered this historical trend. As boomer women entered the professional workforce in record numbers throughout the late 70s and 80s, they began accumulating their own Social Security credits, private pension contributions, and 401k balances. By the time we reached the mid-2020s, many of these women found themselves in a position where the financial necessity of staying in an unhappy marriage had significantly diminished. Consider the case study of Linda and Robert, a couple living in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio. In 2026, Robert is 71 and Linda is 68. They married in 1982, raised 2 children, and built a life centered around Robert's career in manufacturing and Linda's 25-year tenure as a registered nurse. Their home, purchased for $90,000 in the late 80s, is now valued at over $500,000. Historically, a couple in this position would stay together simply because the logistics of untangling 40 years of commingled assets felt insurmountable. But Linda, looking at her own retirement portfolio and her share of the home equity, realizes that her potential outcomes as a single woman are far more viable than they would have been for her mother's generation. She isn't looking for a get-rich-quick exit. She is looking for a self-actualized final chapter. This leads us to the concept of the empty nest as a catalyst for marital dissolution. For many boomer couples, the children were the glue that held the structure together. The daily grind of soccer practices, college applications, and career advancement provided a shared mission that masked the underlying erosion of their romantic connection. When the last child moved out, many couples expected to rediscover each other. Instead, they found themselves living with a stranger. In the current 2026 landscape, we see a trend where couples wait until the very last child is settled, perhaps even through their own early career milestones, before acknowledging that the shared mission has been completed. Imagine a scenario where a couple, let's call them James and Sarah from Scottsdale, Arizona, reach their 40th anniversary. They have spent 4 decades prioritizing everyone else's needs. Now, with the kids gone and retirement looming, they realize their visions for the future are diametrically opposed. James wants to sell the house and travel the country in an RV, while Sarah wants to stay close to the grandkids and start a local community garden. In previous eras, one partner, usually Sarah, would likely have compromised. In 2026, the cultural emphasis on individual fulfillment over self-sacrifice means that Sarah is more likely to choose her garden and her autonomy, even if it means splitting their retirement nest egg down the middle. The financial math of this transition is staggering. When we analyze historical trends, we see that the division of assets in a gray divorce often results in a significant shift in the standard of living for both parties, but it hits differently in the current economic climate. In 2026, with the cost of housing and healthcare at all-time highs, splitting one household into 2 is an expensive endeavor. There is the immediate problem of the marital home. For a couple like Robert and Linda, the home is their largest asset. Under current 2026 market conditions, selling the home and splitting the proceeds might seem logical, but where do they go next? With mortgage rates and property prices where they are, neither may be able to afford a comparable home on their own. This often leads to complex negotiations where one party trades their share of a pension for the deed to the house, a move that requires precise actuarial calculations to ensure long-term stability. Furthermore, we must address the longevity factor. In 2026, medical advancements have shifted the focus from merely surviving to thriving well into one's 80s and 90s. When a 65-year-old looks at the 25 or 30 years of life they potentially have left, they view it as a whole new stage of development rather than a slow fade into the sunset. This psychological shift is a primary driver of the gray divorce revolution. The prospect of spending 30 years in a state of quiet desperation is far more daunting than the prospect of a late-life solo adventure. This isn't an impulsive decision made in the heat of an argument. It is often a calculated, years-long realization that the third act of life deserves a different cast of characters. Data from recent sociological studies in the United States highlights that for many boomers, the primary reason for divorce isn't a catastrophic event like infidelity or financial ruin. Instead, it is a gradual drifting apart, often referred to as growing apart. Historical trends show that younger couples often divorce due to high conflict issues, but gray divorce is frequently characterized by a lack of conflict, a profound boredom, or a realization that they have nothing left to say to one another. This is the death of the marriage by 1,000 small silences. Step by step, the process of a gray divorce in 2026 involves more than just signing papers. It involves the forensic accounting of a lifetime of earnings. We see case studies where the primary challenge isn't who gets the car, but how to handle the survivor benefits of a pension plan, or how to divide a complex portfolio of traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs without incurring massive tax liabilities. In 2026, the role of a financial mediator has become just as critical as the role of a divorce attorney. These professionals look at the potential outcomes of every decision, from the timing of the filing to the specific wording of a qualified domestic relations order. Another factor we must examine is the role of technology and social media. In 2026, the world is more connected than ever. A 60-year-old in a lonely marriage can look at social media and see peers who are traveling, dating, and starting new businesses after divorce. This visibility reduces the fear of the unknown. It provides a blueprint for a life after marriage that simply didn't exist for previous generations. The social stigma that once kept couples together has been replaced by a digital community that encourages starting over. However, we must also consider the cautionary side of these historical trends. While the pursuit of happiness is a powerful motivator, the economic reality of gray divorce can be harsh. Historical data suggests that women, in particular, often see a more significant decline in their standard of living post-divorce compared to men. This is often due to the cumulative effect of the gender pay gap and time taken out of the workforce for caregiving duties earlier in life. In 2026, as we look at the potential outcomes for a woman entering the singles market at 70, the importance of robust financial planning cannot be overstated. As we continue this deep dive, we have to ask, what happens to the social fabric when the longest-standing marriages in our society begin to unravel? How does this affect the adult children who are now finding themselves acting as emotional anchors for their divorcing parents? And perhaps most importantly, what are the hidden health risks associated with the social isolation that can follow a late-life split? The gray divorce revolution is more than just a change in marital status. It is a fundamental shift in how we age in America. But before we can understand the social impact, we have to look at the one thing that truly keeps these couples awake at night: the terrifying and complex world of the silver-haired dating market, and the unexpected ways the digital world is complicating the search for a second chance at love. We will explore the mechanics of late-life romance and the surprising risks of the 2026 dating scene in the next part. The transition from a 40-year marriage to the 2026 dating market is not a mere change in relationship status. It is an entry into a foreign landscape with its own set of rules, languages, and high-tech gatekeepers. For a generation that largely met their spouses through college mixers, church functions, or mutual friends in the late 1970s, the current digital reality is a seismic shock. Imagine David, a 72-year-old retired architect living in a quiet neighborhood in Chicago. David hasn't been on a first date since Jimmy Carter was in the White House. After his divorce was finalized earlier this year, he found himself sitting in his living room, staring at a smartphone screen, trying to distill 4 decades of life, 3 children, and a complex career into a 200-character bio. This is the first hurdle of the gray divorce revolution: the sudden need to market oneself in a world that operates on algorithms rather than organic chemistry. In 2026, historical trends show that dating apps specifically tailored for the over 60 demographic have seen a user surge of over 40% compared to just 5 years ago. Platforms like Silver Horizons or Wisdom Match have moved beyond simple swiping. They now utilize sophisticated artificial intelligence to analyze lifestyle values, medical compatibility, and even financial risk tolerance. For someone like David, the process is intimidating. He isn't just looking for a partner. He is navigating a technological ecosystem where your digital footprint determines your romantic visibility. The step-by-step reality of this often begins with a professional photo shoot. Gone are the days of blurry Polaroids. In 2026, successful late-life dating often involves curated imagery that portrays an active, healthy lifestyle, which can be an exhausting demand for someone still mourning the loss of their primary life partnership. However, the 2026 dating scene isn't just about finding a new companion. It is also about navigating significant risks. We must address a darker aspect of this historical trend: the rise of sophisticated romance scams targeting the boomer demographic. As deepfake technology and AI-generated social engineering have become more prevalent, the potential outcomes for an emotionally vulnerable senior can be devastating. Case studies from the Federal Trade Commission indicate that older adults are frequently targeted by bad actors who use emotional leverage to gain access to retirement accounts. This is where education becomes a vital shield. Individuals entering this market must learn to recognize the red flags of love bombing or requests for financial assistance disguised as emergencies. The 2026 dating world requires a level of digital literacy and skepticism that many boomers never had to develop during their decades of marital stability. Imagine another scenario with Susan, a 69-year-old former teacher from Miami. After her divorce, Susan was eager for companionship but terrified of the stories she had heard. She represents a growing trend in 2026 called living apart together, or LAT. This is a sociological shift where seniors enter into committed, long-term romantic relationships but maintain entirely separate households. For Susan, the idea of merging her finances or sharing a kitchen with another person after 40 years of compromise is unappealing. She wants the intimacy of a partner for dinners, travel, and emotional support, but she wants to return to her own quiet home at the end of the night. Historical trends suggest that the LAT lifestyle is becoming the gold standard for gray divorcees because it allows for romantic fulfillment without the logistical and financial entanglements that led to the friction in their first marriages. This preference for autonomy over traditional cohabitation leads to a critical discussion about the late-life prenup. In 2026, entering a new relationship at 70 is as much a legal and financial decision as it is an emotional one. When David finally meets someone on an app, his first thought isn't just about their shared interests in jazz. It's about his children's inheritance. Historical trends show a massive spike in legal consultations regarding cohabitation agreements and prenuptial contracts for the over 70 crowd. Potential outcomes of failing to document these boundaries can include messy estate battles between adult children and a new spouse. The 2026 dater is often walking a tightrope between their desire for a second chance at love and their duty to protect the legacy they built during their first marriage. There is also the physiological aspect of dating in 2026. Health and intimacy have been redefined by medical advancements, Boomers are more active and healthier than any previous generation at this age, leading to a vibrant, yet complicated social life. We see case studies where health disclosure becomes a major milestone in the dating process. How do you tell a new partner about a heart condition or a knee replacement? In the 2026 landscape, these conversations happen much earlier than they did in the past. There is a newfound pragmatism in late-life romance. It is less about the grand sweeping gestures of youth and more about finding someone whose medication schedule and energy levels align with your own. Furthermore, we cannot ignore the role of the adult children in this transition. In 2026, many boomer children are in their late 30s or early 40s, and they often have strong opinions about their parents' new romantic endeavors. Imagine the tension when David introduces his new girlfriend to his daughter, only to find that the daughter is concerned about the impact on her father's estate. This adds a layer of social complexity to the gray divorce that younger couples simply don't face. The divorce doesn't just split a couple. It forces the entire family tree to recalibrate its expectations. The emotional resilience required to navigate this is immense. For many, the first few months post-divorce are spent in a state of sensory overload. The silence of a house once filled with the noise of a family can be deafening. This is why we see a rise in 2026 in specialized support groups for gray divorcees. These aren't just therapy sessions. They are strategic masterclasses in rebuilding a social identity from scratch. Step by step, individuals like David and Susan are learning to find value in their own company before they ever download a dating app. They are exploring new hobbies, re-engaging with old friends, and discovering that their identity isn't solely defined by their role as a spouse. But even as they find their footing in the dating world, a much larger, more imposing shadow looms over every decision they make. While finding a new partner provides emotional relief, it doesn't solve the underlying economic math that has been fractured by the divorce. The 2026 economy is unforgiving to those who don't have a clear plan for their divided assets. As we move forward, we must look at the cold, hard numbers that define the aftermath of a gray divorce. The division of a retirement nest egg isn't just a legal procedure. It's a high-stakes calculation that determines whether you spend your final decades in comfort or in a state of constant financial anxiety. We are about to go deep into the most complex part of this journey, the battle for the 401k, the pension, and the primary residence. What happens when the math doesn't add up? And how are boomers in 2026 surviving the financial fallout? We will break down the true cost of starting over in the next part. The financial math of a gray divorce in 2026 is often a cold splash of water on the face of a generation that has spent decades accumulating wealth together. When you are 25, you are dividing a small savings account and perhaps some student debt. When you are 65 or 70, you are dividing a lifetime of compounding interest, real estate appreciation, and complex benefit structures. The core issue is that while the assets are split in half, the cost of living essentially doubles. Historical trends show that a single household operating on a combined income of $100,000 is significantly more efficient than two households operating on $50,000 each. In the 2026 economy, with inflation still a persistent factor in housing and services, this efficiency gap has become a chasm that swallows retirement dreams whole. Let us look at a case study involving Michael and Deborah, a couple from Charlotte, North Carolina. In early 2026, after 42 years of marriage, they decided to part ways. Michael, 70, had spent his career as a middle manager in the telecommunications industry, while Deborah, 68, worked part-time as a librarian while managing the household. Their combined assets included a $401,000 Michael's pension, which promised $3,000 a month, and a home they bought in 1995 that is now valued at $750,000. On paper, they are wealthy. In reality, the potential outcomes of their split are fraught with logistical nightmares. The first step in their financial dissolution is the Qualified Domestic Relations Order, or QDRO. This is a legal instrument that many couples overlook until they are deep in the process. Without a QDRO, Michael could not simply give Deborah half of his 401k without triggering massive tax penalties and early withdrawal fees, even though he is over the age of 59 and a half. The QDRO allows for the tax-free transfer of retirement assets into a separate account for the former spouse. However, in 2026, the cost of drafting these documents has risen, and the backlog in family courts means this process can take months, during which time neither party can easily access the funds they need to establish new lives. For Michael and Deborah, splitting that 401k meant they each suddenly had $200,000. A sum that feels significant but, when calculated against a 20-year life expectancy, offers only a modest monthly draw. Next, we must examine the Social Security trap, a topic of intense discussion in 2026. Historical trends in the United States Social Security Administration policy provide a specific lifeline for long-term married couples, but it comes with a strict 10-year rule. Because Michael and Deborah were married for more than 10 years, Deborah is entitled to claim Social Security benefits based on Michael's earnings record once she reaches retirement age, provided she remains unmarried. This does not reduce Michael's own benefit, but it provides Deborah with a potential outcome of receiving up to 50% of his primary insurance amount if her own benefit is lower. This is a critical piece of the 2026 gray divorce puzzle, yet many individuals are unaware of it, leading to unnecessary anxiety about their future cash flow. However, the primary residence remains the largest hurdle. In the 2026 housing market, the math of the family home has become distorted. Imagine if Michael wants to stay in the Charlotte house. To do so, he must buy out Deborah's $375,000 of equity. In the past, he might have taken out a home equity line of credit or a new mortgage to fund the buyout. But with 2026 interest rates remaining elevated compared to the historic lows of the previous decade, the cost of debt is prohibitive. If they choose to sell the house and split the proceeds, they face a different problem: the replacement cost. After paying realtor fees, closing costs, and taxes, Deborah might walk away with $340,000. In a city like Charlotte in 2026, finding a safe, accessible, and modern condo for that price is increasingly difficult. They often find themselves moving from a 3,000 square foot suburban home into a 900 square foot apartment, a transition that carries a heavy psychological toll. We also have to discuss the concept of alimony, which in 2026 is undergoing a shift in historical trends. In the past, permanent alimony was common in long-term marriages where one spouse stayed home. Today, many states have moved toward rehabilitative or durational alimony, which is intended to be temporary. For a 68-year-old like Deborah, the idea of rehabilitating her career is a non-starter. This leads to high-stakes negotiations where the pension becomes the bargaining chip. In Michael and Deborah's case, Deborah might agree to take a larger share of the house equity in exchange for waiving her right to Michael's pension. This is a risky trade. The house has ongoing costs, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance, while the pension is a guaranteed stream of income. In 2026, as the cost of home insurance in many parts of the United States has skyrocketed, many gray divorcees are finding themselves house poor, owning a valuable asset but lacking the liquid cash to buy groceries or pay for healthcare. This brings us to the silent wealth killer of the 2026 gray divorce: healthcare. If a couple divorces before they are both 65, the spouse who was covered under the other's employer-sponsored plan faces a massive insurance gap. While COBRA is an option, it is notoriously expensive. Even after 65, when Medicare kicks in, the costs are not negligible. Historical trends show that an average 65-year-old couple in 2026 will need approximately $350,000 to cover healthcare and medical expenses throughout retirement. When that couple splits, they lose the ability to share these costs or provide care for one another. A single person in their 70s often has to pay for outside help for tasks that a spouse would have performed for free, such as driving to appointments or post-surgical care. Step by step, the financial reality of gray divorce is an exercise in downsizing expectations. It requires a forensic look at every subscription, every insurance policy, and every utility bill. We see case studies where individuals are forced to return to the workforce in their late 60s just to bridge the gap between their divided assets and their new cost of living. This isn't just about losing a partner. It's about losing a financial safety net that was 40 years in the making. As these couples navigate the arithmetic of their new lives, they often focus so heavily on the dollars and cents that they miss the looming shadow of the next great challenge. While the bank accounts are being drained, another vital resource is also at risk: their social and physical health. The 2026 data is starting to show a terrifying correlation between late-life divorce and a decline in physical well-being. It turns out that the stress of splitting a 401k is nothing compared to the biological impact of sudden isolation. Why are gray divorcees experiencing higher rates of chronic illness, and what is the hidden health tax that no one talks about during the mediation process? We are going to dive into the physical and psychological toll of the gray divorce revolution and how it is literally changing the biology of the boomer generation in the next part. While the division of bank accounts and real estate equity occupies the legal phase of a gray divorce, there is a far more insidious tax being levied on the baby boomer generation: the physiological and psychological toll on the human body. In 2026, medical research has begun to quantify the high cost of late-life separation, revealing that the stress of a divorce at age 70 is not merely an emotional hurdle, but a biological event that can alter one's very DNA. When a partnership of 40 years dissolves, the body loses its primary regulator. We have long understood the concept of the widowhood effect, where the surviving spouse's health rapidly declines after the death of a partner. In 2026, sociologists and medical professionals are observing a near-identical phenomenon among gray divorcees. This is the biological reality of the gray divorce revolution, where the sudden shift from a shared life to a solitary existence triggers a cascade of physical consequences. To understand this, we must look at the concept of allostatic load, which is the wear and tear on the body that accumulates when an individual is exposed to chronic stress. For a boomer in the midst of a 2026 divorce, this stress is constant. It isn't just the big court dates. It is the daily, hourly reminders of a life dismantled. Imagine Mark, a 67-year-old retired civil engineer in Seattle. Mark has been married to his wife, Ellen, since 1985. In early 2026, they finalized their split. For 4 decades, Ellen was the silent manager of Mark's health. She noticed when his cough sounded different. She ensured he took his blood pressure medication with breakfast. She stocked the refrigerator with fresh produce. After the divorce, Mark moves into a modern apartment in the city. Within 6 months, his health begins to crater. Mark's story illustrates a critical historical trend known as the health manager deficit. In many boomer marriages, one spouse, statistically most often the wife, takes on the role of the primary health coordinator. When that partnership ends, the remaining spouse, usually the husband, often experiences a sharp decline in medical compliance and nutritional quality. Mark starts skipping his morning pills because there is no one there to remind him, stops cooking balanced meals because cooking for one feels like a chore, leading to a diet high in processed sodium and sugar. By the summer of 2026, Mark's blood pressure, which had been stable for a decade, is in the danger zone. This isn't a lack of intelligence. It is the loss of a social and biological support system that functioned as a protective buffer for 40 years. Furthermore, we must discuss the cortisol factor. Chronic stress, like that experienced during a high-stakes asset division in 2026, keeps the body in a perpetual state of fight or flight. This leads to elevated levels of cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. In older adults, prolonged cortisol elevation is linked to a suppressed immune system, making them more susceptible to everything from the common flu to more serious shingles outbreaks. Data from 2026 health surveys indicate that divorcees over 65 have a significantly higher rate of chronic inflammatory conditions compared to their married peers. The stress literally accelerates the aging process at a cellular level. Specifically, researchers are looking at telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes. Historical trends in biological studies suggest that high-stress life events like late-life divorce can lead to the premature shortening of these telomeres, which is a primary marker of biological aging and a predictor of a shorter lifespan. Then there is the issue of Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, often called broken heart syndrome. While typically associated with the sudden death of a loved one, in 2026, we are seeing more cases linked to the extreme emotional distress of a contentious divorce. Imagine the physical impact on a 70-year-old woman who discovers that her life savings are being split, and she may have to sell her home of 30 years. The surge in adrenaline and other stress hormones can temporarily stun the heart muscle, mimicking a heart attack. While often treatable, the potential outcomes for an older adult with pre-existing heart conditions can be life-threatening. The emotional trauma of a gray divorce is not just in the mind. It is etched into the cardiovascular system. The psychological impact also manifests as a cognitive threat. In 2026, the link between social isolation and the onset of dementia has become a major public health concern. Marriage, even one that is moderately unhappy, provides a constant stream of cognitive stimulation. You are talking, arguing, planning, and interacting. When a gray divorcee moves into a solitary living arrangement, that cognitive engine often slows down. Historical trends indicate that social isolation is one of the leading preventable risk factors for cognitive decline. Without the daily engagement of a partner, a senior's world can shrink rapidly. This is particularly dangerous in the 2026 landscape, where digital interactions often replace physical ones. A divorcee sitting alone with a tablet for 10 hours a day is at a much higher risk for depression and subsequent memory issues than someone engaged in the daily friction and fellowship of a marriage. However, it is not all grim. In 2026, we are also seeing a counter-trend, the health reclamation. Some boomers find that the end of a high-conflict or emotionally draining marriage actually leads to a health resurgence. Consider a case study of a woman who spent 20 years as a caregiver for a spouse with chronic health issues, while neglecting her own well-being. After the divorce, she joins a walking club, changes her diet, and finally addresses her own medical needs. Potential outcomes for these individuals include lower stress levels and a renewed sense of vitality. But this reclamation requires a step-by-step commitment to self-care that many are too exhausted to initiate. In the 2026 environment, technology is attempting to bridge this gap. We see an increase in the use of smart home health monitors specifically designed for the silver splitter. These devices can detect falls, monitor heart rates, and even use AI to analyze whether a person's gait has changed, an early warning sign of health issues. For someone like Mark in Seattle, these tools are becoming a new kind of health manager. But technology cannot replace the human touch or the emotional security of a long-term partner. The 2026 gray divorcee is often living in a paradox. They have gained their independence, but they have lost their primary caregiver, just as they are entering the stage of life where caregiving becomes a necessity. Step by step, the health impact of gray divorce unfolds over the first 24 months. The first 6 months are defined by acute stress and sleep deprivation. The next 12 months often see the manifestation of chronic issues like weight gain or increased blood pressure. By the 2-year mark, the individual has either established a new, healthy routine or has entered a cycle of declining wellness. The 2026 data suggests that those who successfully navigate this transition are the ones who proactively build a new social tribe to replace the nuclear family they left behind. As we look at these aging bodies and stressed minds, we have to realize that the impact doesn't stop with the couple. There is another group of people who are being pulled into this biological and emotional vortex, often without warning. While Mark is struggling with his blood pressure and Ellen is navigating her new apartment, their children, now in their 30s and 40s, are watching their foundation crumble. The impact on adult children of gray divorce is the silent crisis of 2026. What happens to the holidays, the grandchildren, and the inheritance when the parents decide to start over? We are about to explore the explosive emotional fallout for the next generation, and the impossible choices they are forced to make when their parents become single again. The family dynamic is being rewritten in real time, and the next chapter is the most painful one yet. The myth that adult children are unaffected by their parents' divorce is one of the most significant misconceptions in the 2026 sociological landscape. We often assume that because a 35 or 45-year-old has their own career, their own mortgage, and perhaps their own family, they no longer rely on the stability of their parents' marriage. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of the family architecture. For the adult child, the parental marriage is the base camp. It is the one place in a chaotic world where the rules are known, the history is shared, and the foundation is supposedly immovable. When that foundation cracks in a gray divorce, the adult children often experience a profound sense of retroactive disbelief. They begin to look back at their entire childhood, the family vacations in the 90s, the graduations, the holiday dinners, and wonder if it was all a carefully constructed performance. This psychological destabilization is a primary feature of the gray divorce revolution in 2026. Imagine the case study of Jason, a 38-year-old project manager living in Austin, Texas. In the spring of 2026, Jason is juggling a high-pressure job and raising 2 young children with his wife. He views his parents, who have been married for 44 years, as the gold standard of commitment. When his father calls to tell him that they are filing for divorce, Jason's world doesn't just change, it undergoes a total revision. Suddenly, the home he grew up in, the physical space that represented safety, is being put on the market. In the 2026 real estate climate, this means the house will likely be sold to a developer and demolished or flipped, erasing the physical touchstones of Jason's youth. Historical trends show that the loss of the family home in a gray divorce often triggers a secondary mourning period for adult children, who feel as though their own history is being liquidated for asset division. The logistics of family life in 2026 become an immediate, high-stakes puzzle. Consider the holiday schedule. For decades, Thanksgiving and Christmas had a set rhythm. Now, Jason is faced with the exhausting task of navigating two separate celebrations. Because his parents can no longer stand to be in the same room, Jason and his wife are forced to choose, or worse, split their limited vacation time to accommodate both. This is the holiday Hunger Games of the 2026 gray divorce. The emotional labor required to manage the expectations of two hurting, often bitter, 70-year-old parents is immense. Historical trends suggest that this often leads to burnout among the sandwich generation, those who are simultaneously caring for their own children and managing the emotional fallout of their parents' late-life split. Furthermore, we must examine the impact on the grandchildren. In Jason's case, his children are 5 and 7. They don't understand the complexities of asset division or irreconcilable differences. They only know that grandma and grandpa no longer live in the house with the big backyard. In 2026, with the rising cost of travel and housing, the potential outcomes for grandparent-grandchild bonding are often diminished. If Jason's mother moves to a smaller condo in a different city to afford her new single life, the frequent, casual visits that define the children's early years are replaced by scheduled, formal trips. The organic transmission of family legacy is interrupted. We are seeing a trend where the dissolution of the boomer marriage creates a geographic and emotional distance that thins the family fabric for the third generation. The financial anxiety for adult children is another deep dive topic that is rarely discussed in mainstream media. In 2026, with healthcare costs and long-term care insurance premiums at record highs, Jason isn't just worried about his parents' happiness. He is worried about their solvency. When his parents were together, they had a combined nest egg that could weather a significant medical crisis. Split in half, those same assets may not last through their 80s. Jason faces the very real possibility that he may have to financially subsidize two separate households in the future. Historical trends indicate that gray divorce significantly increases the likelihood that an adult child will eventually have to provide direct financial support or become a primary caregiver for a parent who can no longer afford professional help. This is the hidden inheritance tax of the gray divorce, not a tax paid to the government, but a depletion of the family's collective resources that would have otherwise supported the next generation. Then there is the issue of parentification. In 2026, many divorcing boomers find themselves socially isolated and turn to their adult children for emotional support. Jason finds himself on the phone for hours with his mother, listening to her vent about his father's past transgressions, details Jason never wanted to know. This role reversal, where the child becomes the confidant and emotional anchor for the parent, creates a boundary crisis. It forces the adult child to take sides, even when they desperately want to remain neutral. Case studies show that this triangulation often leads to long-term estrangement between the adult child and one of the parents, usually the one perceived as the initiator or the one who is less emotionally demanding. We also have to talk about the awkwardness of the new partner. In 2026, as we discussed, many boomers are re-entering the dating market with the help of AI-driven apps. Imagine Jason's reaction when his 72-year-old father introduces him to a new girlfriend who is only 5 years older than Jason himself. The introduction of new romantic interests into the family dynamic creates a minefield of social friction. Does Jason invite the new girlfriend to his daughter's birthday party? How does his mother feel about a stranger sitting in her place at family events? These are not hypothetical questions. They are the daily realities for millions of American families in 2026. The potential outcomes range from a successful integration of a blended family to a total collapse of family communication. Step by step, the adult child's journey through a gray divorce involves 3 distinct phases. First is the crisis phase, where they act as mediators and logistics managers. Second is the realization phase, where they grapple with the financial and historical implications for their own lives. Third is the recalibration phase, where they have to build a new family culture that doesn't rely on the parental union as its center. In the 2026 environment, this recalibration often involves difficult conversations about estate planning, powers of attorney, and future living arrangements that must be held while the emotional wounds are still fresh. The gray divorce revolution is rewriting the American family tree in real time. It is stripping away the illusion of the permanent patriarch and matriarch and replacing it with a more fluid, and often more fragile, set of relationships. For the boomers, it is an act of liberation. For their children, it is often an act of reconstruction. But as we look at the emotional and financial wreckage, we have to realize that some assets can't be divided by a court order. There is one specific area of conflict that is becoming the ultimate battleground for gray divorcees in 2026, involving something far more precious than a 401k or a summer home. It involves the fight over the family's digital and sentimental legacy, the photos, the videos, and the cloud-stored memories that define 40 years of existence. Who owns the history of a broken family? We are going to explore the high-tech battle for the family archives, and the surprising legal precedents being set in the fight for the digital soul of the marriage in the next part. The battle for the digital soul of a 40-year marriage is perhaps the most modern and most exhausting frontier of the gray divorce revolution in 2026. When a couple divorces in their 20s, their digital footprint is often manageable and segmented. But for the baby boomer generation, the last 20 years have involved a gradual but total migration of their entire history into the cloud. We are talking about tens of thousands of family photos, scanned documents from the 1980s, videos of grandchildren, and shared login credentials for everything from the utility bills to the Netflix account. In the 2026 legal landscape, we are seeing a massive surge in what attorneys call digital asset discovery. This is not about hidden offshore accounts. It is about the custody of the family's collective memory. Imagine the case study of Gary and Linda, a couple from Raleigh, North Carolina, finalizing their split in the summer of 2026. They have lived through the transition from film cameras to digital DSLRs to smartphones. Their shared Google Photos account contains over 150,000 images. Historically, the division of photos involved a physical box and 2 stacks. In 2026, the process is a nightmare of password permissions and storage tiers. Gary, who was always the more tech-savvy of the two, holds the primary administrative access to the family's cloud storage. When the divorce proceedings turn contentious, Gary changes the password and sets up 2-factor authentication on his new device. Suddenly, Linda is locked out of 40 years of her own history. She can no longer see the photos of her late mother or the video of her daughter's first steps. In 2026, courts are increasingly viewing these digital archives not just as sentimental items, but as property with significant functional value. Legal precedents are being set where judges order the duplication of cloud accounts, but the technical execution is fraught with potential outcomes that favor the more tech-literate spouse. There is a specific historical trend emerging where digital lockout is used as a form of emotional leverage. If Gary wants Linda to concede on the division of the vacation home equity, he might slow-walk the transfer of the digital archives. This is a high-tech version of holding a family heirloom hostage. The step-by-step reality of resolving this involves hiring a digital forensic specialist, a new and expensive line item in the 2026 divorce budget. These specialists are tasked with ensuring a bit-for-bit copy of the cloud data is created and transferred to a neutral server before the original account is closed or modified. Beyond the photos, we must look at the smart home ecosystem. In 2026, the average boomer home is equipped with a suite of IoT devices, from Ring doorbells and Nest thermostats to smart refrigerators and security cameras. Consider a scenario where one spouse moves out, but retains administrative access to the home's smart system. We have seen case studies where the departing spouse uses the smartphone app to monitor the front door, adjust the temperature remotely to make the other spouse uncomfortable, or even speak through the security cameras. This is a form of digital harassment that the legal system in 2026 is still struggling to categorize. It requires a meticulous step-by-step audit of every connected device in the house. The remaining spouse must essentially perform a digital exorcism, factory resetting every hub and camera to ensure their privacy is maintained. Then there is the issue of the social media legacy. For many boomers in 2026, Facebook is the primary town square for their social circle. When a long-term marriage ends, the digital unfriending is the modern equivalent of a public declaration of war. Historical trends indicate that the way a couple manages their social media presence during a divorce can have a profound impact on their social standing and their relationships with adult children. Imagine a situation where one partner begins scrubbing the other from their profile, deleting decades of shared posts and photos. For the adult children like Jason, whom we discussed earlier, this is a form of digital gaslighting. It is as if their parents are trying to retroactively erase the fact that they ever existed as a family unit. In 2026, some divorce settlements now include clauses regarding digital conduct, prohibiting the disparagement of the other spouse on social media, or the unilateral deletion of family history from public platforms. We also have to address the complex world of shared subscriptions and digital inheritance. In 2026, many couples share a dizzying array of accounts, Amazon Prime, Spotify, news subscriptions, and even loyalty programs like Delta SkyMiles or Marriott Bonvoy points. Dividing these is not as simple as splitting a bank account. For example, airline miles often cannot be transferred between accounts without significant fees, leading to potential outcomes where one spouse is forced to buy out the other's share of the travel rewards. This requires a granular accounting of every digital asset, no matter how small. Case studies show that couples often spend more in legal fees arguing over 100,000 airline miles than the miles are actually worth, simply because those miles represent the shared dreams of their retirement travel. The psychological toll of this digital dissolution is immense. For a boomer, losing access to their digital identity is a form of disenfranchisement. It is the loss of their narrative. In 2026, we are seeing the rise of the digital divorce consultant, professionals who specialize in the peaceful partitioning of a digital life. They help couples create a step-by-step plan for who keeps the family domain name, how the Ancestry.com tree will be managed, and who gets to maintain the digital memorial pages for deceased relatives. This is the new reality of the American breakup. The divorce doesn't end when the papers are signed. It ends when the last shared password is changed and the last cloud sync is completed. Furthermore, we must consider the impact on estate planning. In 2026, digital assets are a core component of a person's legacy. When a gray divorce occurs, all existing digital wills and legacy contact settings must be updated. If a boomer spouse dies during the divorce process without updating their legacy contact on Apple or Google, the surviving but estranged spouse could be granted total access to their private communications and data, leading to significant privacy breaches and potential legal battles for the adult children. As we move through this digital labyrinth, we begin to see that the gray divorce revolution is stripping away every layer of the boomer experience, from the physical to the virtual. But as the screens go dark and the accounts are unlinked, the couple is forced back into the real world, where a different kind of judgment awaits. While they are fighting over passwords and cloud storage, their social circles, the friends, the neighbors, and the community groups they have belonged to for decades, are performing their own kind of audit. The social fallout of a gray divorce is a brutal process of picking sides that can leave even the most resilient individual completely isolated. How does a 70-year-old navigate the collapse of their entire social world? We are about to look at the devastating reality of social contagion and the fracturing of the boomer community in the next part. When a couple of 40 years calls it quits in 2026, the shockwaves don't stop at the property line. They travel through the neighborhood, the country club, and the tight-knit social circles that have been solidified over decades. This is the phenomenon known as social contagion, and in the context of the gray divorce revolution, it is a powerful force that can dismantle an entire community's stability. Historical trends in sociology, specifically research from institutions like Brown University and Harvard, have identified that divorce can actually be infectious. If you have a close friend who goes through a divorce, your own chances of following suit increase by a staggering 75%. If a friend of a friend gets divorced, you are still 33% more likely to see your own marriage dissolve. In 2026, as the boomer generation faces this late-life transition, we are seeing the emergence of divorce clusters, entire groups of friends who begin to unravel sequentially after the first anchor couple breaks apart. Imagine the social world of Richard and Nancy, a couple living in a master-planned community in the suburbs of Atlanta. For 30 years, their social life has been built on the foundation of the foursome. Every Friday night, they meet another couple for dinner. Every spring, they go on a double-date vacation to the coast. Their identity isn't just as a couple, but as part of a unit of four. When Richard and Nancy announce their separation in 2026, the remaining couple doesn't just lose a friend, they lose their social infrastructure. The foursome is dead. This creates a state of social vertigo. Does the remaining couple invite only Nancy to dinner? Is Richard still allowed in the golf group? These questions lead to the social audit, a brutal process where friends are forced to evaluate their loyalties, often resulting in one spouse being completely purged from the social calendar. In the 2026 landscape, historical trends suggest that this side-taking is rarely balanced. We often see a gendered split in social survival. Men in this demographic frequently rely on their wives to manage the social calendar and maintain the couples-based friendships. When the marriage ends, the man often finds himself adrift. If he wasn't the one who organized the dinner parties or sent the holiday cards, he may find that the invitations simply stop coming. Case studies of divorced men in their 70s show a high rate of social isolation because the friends they shared as a couple tend to gravitate toward the wife, who remains the emotional core of the group. For the man, the potential outcomes often include a sudden, sharp descent into loneliness, which, as we discussed in the health segment, carries significant physiological risks in 2026. Conversely, the woman may keep the friends but lose the access. Imagine if Nancy stays in the friend group but finds herself the only single person at a table of 4 couples. This is the couples-only tax. It is the subtle, often unintentional exclusion from events that are inherently designed for pairs. Cruises, resort packages, and dinner parties are often optimized for even numbers. Nancy may find that while her friends still love her, she is no longer a natural fit for the logistics of their lives. In 2026, this has led to a rise in niche social organizations specifically for the silver splitter. We are seeing a boom in travel agencies and social clubs that cater exclusively to single boomers, providing a new tribe for those who have been marginalized by their old one. The step-by-step fracture of a social circle usually follows a predictable, painful pattern. Step 1 is the announcement, followed by a period of performative neutrality where everyone claims they won't take sides. Step 2 is the logistical nightmare of the first major event: a wedding, a graduation, or a holiday party. This is where the first real lines are drawn. If both Richard and Nancy are invited, the tension can be suffocating for everyone involved. If only one is invited, the other feels a profound sense of betrayal. Step 3 is the selective leaking of information. As each spouse tells their version of the story to mutual friends, the group begins to polarize. In 2026, with the speed of digital communication, this polarization happens in real time, often documented through group chats and social media interactions. Step 4 is the final exclusion, where the social circle effectively splits in two, or one party is pushed out entirely to maintain the comfort of the majority. Consider the case study of a tennis club in Naples, Florida. In 2026, a high-profile divorce between 2 long-standing members led to the total reorganization of the club's social hierarchy. Friends who had played together for 20 years found themselves unable to maintain their games because the awkwardness of the split had seeped into the locker room. The potential outcomes of such a situation include a total loss of the hobbies and activities that provided a sense of purpose. When you lose your spouse, you expect the grief. When you lose your tennis group, your favorite restaurant spot, and your New Year's Eve tradition all at once, the loss of identity is compounded. There is also the issue of social legacy. For boomers, their standing in the community is often a source of immense pride. A divorce at 70 can feel like a public admission of failure, regardless of the actual reasons for the split. Historical trends show that many boomers stayed in unhappy marriages specifically to avoid this public scrutiny. In 2026, while the stigma has lessened, the fear of judgment remains. We see individuals who go to great lengths to hide the reality of their separation for months, continuing to appear at events as a couple while living in separate wings of the house or different apartments. This performative marriage creates an immense psychological burden, delaying the healing process for both parties. However, the 2026 environment also offers a path for social reconstruction. We are seeing a trend toward intentional communities, housing developments designed for single seniors that prioritize shared spaces and communal activities. These are not nursing homes. They are high-end, active living environments that allow gray divorcees to build a brand new social world from scratch, free from the baggage of their previous marital identity. Potential outcomes for those who embrace these communities include a significant boost in life satisfaction and a reduction in the stress associated with being the odd one out in their old neighborhoods. As we analyze the social wreckage of the gray divorce revolution, we must acknowledge that for every door that closes, a new, albeit different, one opens. But as the social circles fracture and the friends pick their sides, there is a final darker layer to the divorce process that many boomers are completely unprepared for. While they are navigating the loss of their friends and their standing in the community, they are simultaneously entering a legal and administrative maze that is more complex than anything they faced in their younger years. We have talked about the house, the 401k, and the dog. But what about the things the law doesn't have a clear answer for? What about the gray areas of the gray divorce, the frozen embryos from decades ago, the long-term care plans that were never updated, and the sudden emergence of old debts that were hidden in the shadows of a 40-year marriage? We are about to enter the final, most legally precarious stage of the journey. The hidden legal landmines of 2026 are waiting, and one wrong step can erase a lifetime of security. We will uncover the legal secrets and the final battle for control in the next part. The legal landscape of 2026 has introduced complexities that the baby boomer generation never anticipated, when they were building their lives in the 20th century. While the visible assets like the primary residence and the 401k are the focus of most mediation sessions, the true danger lies in the hidden legal landmines that have been buried under decades of marital routine. These are the issues that arise when 40 years of commingled lives are suddenly subjected to the forensic scrutiny of a modern legal system. In 2026, we are seeing a dramatic rise in cases involving what attorneys call legacy liabilities and accidental beneficiaries. These are the clerical and legal oversights that can lead to potential outcomes where a lifetime of savings is diverted away from the intended heirs or swallowed by administrative traps. Let us examine the first major landmine of 2026, the long-term care insurance trap. Imagine a couple, Robert and Elaine, living in Hartford, Connecticut. Back in 2005, when they were in their late 50s, they did the responsible thing and purchased a joint long-term care, or LTC insurance policy. This was a historical trend among the early wave boomers looking to protect their assets from the astronomical costs of nursing home care. The policy was designed for a couple, offering a shared pool of benefits and a lower combined premium. Now in 2026, as they finalize their divorce, they realize that their LTC carrier does not allow for the policy to be split into two individual plans. If they cancel the policy, they lose 20 years of paid-in premiums and the lower rates they locked in 2 decades ago. If they keep it, they remain financially tethered to an ex-spouse, sharing a limited pool of money for their future care. In the 2026 market, purchasing a new individual LTC policy at age 75 is virtually impossible due to health underwriting and prohibitive costs. Robert and Elaine are trapped in a legal stalemate, forced to negotiate a private agreement on who gets to use the benefits first, a scenario that creates immense stress for their adult children, who will eventually manage their care. Another significant issue we see in 2026 is the discovery of financial infidelity through AI-driven forensic accounting. In a 40-year marriage, it is common for one spouse to have managed the bulk of the finances. Historically, this person held the keys to the kingdom. However, in the current landscape, legal teams use sophisticated software to scan decades of digital bank statements, credit card records, and investment histories. Imagine the case study of Patricia from Portland, Oregon. During her divorce discovery process in early 2026, the software flagged a series of small, consistent transfers to an undisclosed brokerage account that her husband had maintained since the mid-90s. What started as a few $100s a month had grown into a significant secondary nest egg that had never been disclosed in their joint tax filings. This is not just a breach of trust, it is a legal crisis. Patricia now faces a complex battle over the valuation of these hidden assets, potentially involving penalties for tax non-compliance, and the need to restate years of financial history. The step-by-step reality of unearthing these hidden threads requires a level of patience and technical expertise that adds months to the divorce timeline. We must also address a surprising 2026 legal trend: the ghost of fertility past. For younger boomers or those who married later in life, the 1990s and early 2000s were the frontier of assisted reproductive technology. We are currently seeing case studies where couples in their 60s or 70s discover they still have cryopreserved embryos or genetic material stored in a fertility clinic from 25 years ago. In the heat of a 2026 divorce, the question of who owns this material becomes a philosophical and legal battlefield. While the biological clock has long since passed, the legal standing of these embryos can affect inheritance rights and the division of the estate. If the couple cannot agree on the disposition of the material, it can stall the entire divorce settlement, as courts in many states are still catching up to the ethics of late-life genetic custody. Furthermore, we cannot ignore the nightmare of the accidental beneficiary. In 2026, many states have laws that automatically revoke a spouse's status as a beneficiary upon divorce. However, these laws are not universal, and they often do not apply to certain types of federally regulated accounts, such as employer-sponsored life insurance or specific pension plans. Imagine if Robert, in our earlier example, completes his divorce but fails to update the beneficiary designation on a high-value life insurance policy he has held since the 1980s. If he were to pass away shortly after the split, the potential outcomes include a legal battle between his ex-wife and his children. Historical trends show that more litigation is sparked by outdated beneficiary forms than by contested wills. The 2026 divorcee must perform a meticulous, step-by-step audit of every document they have signed in the last 40 years, from bank signatures to the fine print on their corporate benefits package. In the 2026 economy, the valuation of a family business adds another layer of complexity. Many boomers are small business owners, and their company is their primary asset. Splitting a business at age 70 is vastly different than splitting one at 40. At 70, the focus is on succession and exit strategies. What happens if one spouse wants to continue running the business while the other wants to take their half of the value and retire to Florida? In 2026, the market for selling mid-size family businesses is highly competitive, and a forced sale during a divorce can lead to a significant loss in value. We see case studies where the non-operating spouse is granted a buyout that must be paid over 10 or 15 years, essentially turning their ex-spouse into their long-term debtor. This requires ironclad legal protections to ensure the payments continue even if the business fails or the operating spouse becomes incapacitated. The final battle for control often centers on the power of attorney and healthcare proxies. In 2026, as the boomer generation faces more frequent health interventions, the person who has the legal right to make medical decisions is the person who holds the ultimate power. A gray divorcee who has not updated these documents is in a dangerously vulnerable position. Imagine if Elaine is hospitalized for an emergency surgery while her divorce is still pending. Her estranged husband, Robert, may still be her legal healthcare proxy, giving him the power to decide her treatment or access her medical records against her wishes. This is a level of intimacy and control that becomes weaponized in a high-conflict split. Step by step, the 2026 gray divorce is a process of systematic disentanglement. It requires a team of experts, lawyers, forensic accountants, insurance specialists, and digital estate planners, to ensure that no stone is left unturned. The margin for error is zero. As we look at these legal hurdles, we realize that the end of the marriage is just the beginning of a new solitary marathon. But once the assets are divided, the hidden debts are cleared, and the beneficiary forms are updated, a larger question remains. What does the future actually look like for the millions of single boomers who are about to enter their 80s alone? We are heading into the final part of our masterclass, where we will look at the long-term impact of this revolution on the American landscape and the surprising ways the next decade will be defined by the legacy of the gray divorce. The conclusion is not what you expect, and it involves a total reimagining of what it means to age in the United States. We will reveal the final piece of the puzzle in the next part. The total reimagining of aging in America begins with a radical shift in where and how the newly single baby boomer lives. In 2026, the traditional image of the isolated senior in a sprawling empty suburban home is being replaced by a phenomenon known as the intentional co-living revolution. When we look at the potential outcomes of the gray divorce revolution, one of the most striking historical trends is the rise of the roommate economy for the over 65 demographic. This isn't just about saving money on a mortgage that has become unsustainable on a single retirement income. It is about solving the crisis of social isolation that we have explored throughout this masterclass. Consider the case study of Margaret, a 71-year-old former interior designer in Denver. After her 44-year marriage ended in early 2026, Margaret found herself with a significant share of home equity but a terrifying monthly overhead. Instead of downsizing to a lonely one-bedroom apartment, she partnered with two other divorced women to purchase a modern, universally designed triplex. Each woman has a private suite, but they share a high-end kitchen, a garden, and most importantly, the daily responsibilities of life. This model, often called Mama's houses or co-care communities, is becoming a cornerstone of the 2026 housing market. It allows boomers to maintain their independence while creating a built-in support system for health emergencies and social engagement. Step by step, these communities are rewriting the zoning laws of American suburbs, moving away from single-family exclusivity toward a more communal, resilient way of aging. This shift in housing is fueling a massive expansion in what economists in 2026 are calling the solo aging economy. For the first time in history, a massive cohort of wealthy single seniors is demanding services that were once the sole province of the nuclear family. We are seeing the emergence of professional health navigators, individuals whose entire job is to accompany a single boomer to medical appointments, take notes, and ensure follow-up care is managed correctly. In the absence of a spouse, the market has stepped in to provide a paid version of the emotional and logistical support that used to be unpaid labor within a marriage. Historical trends show that this industry is projected to grow by triple digits over the next decade, as the gray divorce revolution continues to peak. Furthermore, we must examine the transformation of the workforce. In 2026, the concept of retirement is being replaced by the encore career. For many divorced boomers, returning to work isn't just a financial necessity to rebuild a fractured nest egg. It is a vital source of identity and social connection. Imagine a scenario with Steven, a 69-year-old in Chicago who had planned to spend his retirement golfing. After his divorce, the golf course felt like a graveyard of his old life. Instead, Steven utilized 2026 micro-credentialing platforms to pivot into a role as a consultant for green energy startups. This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It is a calculated move to maintain cognitive sharpness and financial autonomy. We see case studies where boomers are launching more small businesses in 2026 than any other age group, driven by the freedom and the fear that comes with a late life split. The intergenerational wealth transfer is also taking an unexpected turn. Historically, wealth was passed down in a predictable line from a married couple to their children. In the era of gray divorce, that line has become a web. As boomers split their assets and in many cases repartner or remarry, the eventual inheritance for their adult children becomes increasingly uncertain. In 2026, we are seeing a trend toward giving while living. Because divorced boomers are more aware of the fragility of their financial plans, they are choosing to help their children with home down payments or education costs now, rather than leaving it to a complicated probate process later. This shift is fundamentally changing the financial trajectory of the Millennial and Gen Z generations, who are receiving smaller, more strategic infusions of capital, rather than a single large inheritance at the end of their parents' lives. But the true heart of the reimagining lies in the psychological legacy of the gray divorce revolution. For the baby boomers, this era is the final act of a long-running play about individual liberation. They are the generation that taught America that a life of quiet desperation is not a requirement of adulthood. In 2026, the success of a marriage is no longer measured solely by its duration, but by the health and growth of the individuals within it. This is a profound shift in American values. While the pain of a 40-year breakup is undeniable, the potential outcomes for those who navigate it successfully include a level of self-discovery that was previously reserved for the young. We see boomers in 2026 traveling solo, engaging in intensive therapy, and building deep, platonic friendships that rival the intimacy of their former marriages. The healthcare industry is also pivoting to meet the needs of the single boomer. In 2026, telemedicine has evolved into proactive AI health monitoring. For a divorced senior living alone, a wearable device isn't just a gadget, it is a lifeline. We are seeing historical trends where these devices are linked to a network of local community responders, rather than just emergency services. If the AI detects a change in sleep patterns or activity levels that suggest depression or illness, it triggers a visit from a community peer, a fellow senior who provides the social check-in that a spouse would have provided in the past. This is the birth of the peer-to-peer caregiving network, a decentralized solution to the caregiving gap that the gray divorce revolution has exposed. As we look at the data from the mid-2020s, the synthesis of this revolution becomes clear. The American family is not disappearing. It is diversifying. The gray divorce revolution has forced a national conversation about what it means to be a partner, a parent, and a senior. It has highlighted the need for more flexible legal frameworks, more affordable housing options, and a more robust social safety net for those aging alone. The step-by-step reality of this transition is messy, expensive, and emotionally taxing, but it is also leading to a more honest and active final third of life. The puzzle pieces are finally coming together. We have explored the financial wreckage, the digital battles, the social contagion, and the physical toll. But there is one final overarching truth that defines this movement. The gray divorce revolution is not just a trend of ending marriages. It is a trend of beginning new types of lives. It is the final great disruption by the generation that has disrupted everything else. The boomers are teaching us that it is never too late to ask for more out of life, even if the cost is the world you spent 40 years building. But as this wave of single seniors moves into their 80s and 90s, a new set of questions arises. How will the United States handle the massive demand for solo senior infrastructure? What happens when the first generation of digitally native, divorced seniors requires full-time memory care without a spouse to advocate for them? And perhaps most importantly, as the divorce rates for younger generations continue to fall, will the gray divorce revolution be seen as a one-time demographic anomaly or the new permanent standard for aging in the West? The answers to these questions are being written right now in the courtrooms, the boardrooms, and the new co-living houses of 2026. The journey of the boomer generation is far from over, and the next decade will be the ultimate test of their resilience. As the final signatures are placed on the divorce decrees of 2026, a new mystery begins to emerge, one that involves the surprising rise of a different kind of relationship that is replacing the traditional marriage in the hearts of American seniors. We are just beginning to see the rise of the platonic life partnership, and its impact on the future of wealth and family will be the focus of our next deep dive investigation.